Hey guys, so it's very exciting. I am no longer behind the loom. I am now in front of the loom and getting all of these ends threaded through this reed here, getting ready to weave off this blanket. And so I wanted to very quickly share with you a few of the next steps when it comes to sectional warping. I know we had started talking about that a couple of weeks ago, and I wanted to share with you how to get the yarn from that sectional beam to the front of the loom here. Hey guys, thank you so much for being here. My name is Felicia from SweetGeorgia, and this is Taking Back Friday. This is a space where we come every Friday and we talk about something to do with knitting or weaving or spinning or dyeing. You guys will know that I put on a sectional warp a couple weeks ago on this loom, basically set up a sectional beam in the back to wind yarn onto the loom in a different way than I normally have been, with a warping board and a back to front technique and all that kind of stuff. This is different. And so I felt like I was finding a lot of videos about people cranking the back beam and making these sections. I saw it on Instagram, I saw it on YouTube, but I didn't really see how do you get the yarn from the sectional beam to the heddles, where you're going to thread the heddles, to the reed in the front. So I wanted to just share with you a few of the little steps that I took in order to get that to happen. So one of the things I will first mention is that we were talking last video about how there could be potentially a lot of waste when it comes to doing a sectional warp process. And so yes, I have all of these little storage bobbins here. This storage bobbin was supposed to hold all of the yarn that was required for the warp. And so it was supposed to hold 7 yards times 14 ends times 40 inches wide, that much yarn. So there was 14 of these kinds of bobbins. Now, I got to 38 inches of winding on sections and found that I ran out of yarn on 1 or 2 bobbins. And when I tried to fix one of the bobbins and I'd crank it and then I'd lose another bobbin. And so it just ended up being that I didn't have enough yarn to wind on those last 2 inches. So that's probably a calculation error on my part. Maybe it's a yarn counting error on my part in terms of maybe by cranking the back beam 14 times, each time the beam gets a little bit larger in circumference. And so that's eating up a few more inches of yarn. So inches and inches and inches of yarn ends up being that you've lost 2 inches worth of warp. So this is kind of the waste situation that I'm having. So I have all this extra yarn at the end. Yeah, always open to suggestions on how to not waste stuff. One of the other comments that I got on the YouTube comments for the previous sectional warping video was that maybe you don't necessarily need to wind a whole bunch of these storage bobbins, but you could still wind a conventional warp using a conventional warping board, but just wind it to the section that you need for your sectional beam. So if I'm doing 1-inch sections, then I could just wind chains that are about 1 inch wide and then make 40 chains, each one 1 inch wide. And then with each one of those chains, I would feed it through the tension box and then crank on, and then I'd be done. So that's another thing to try. I'm going to give that a try for the next couple of projects because, winding those storage bobbins is very time consuming. And I don't like the waste. So the next step for getting it off of the sectional beam at the back and bringing it forward to the front is that all of those little sections I had taped down with a little bit of green painter's tape. And so there's 2 pieces of tape. The first piece of tape is to basically take each section with all the yarns coming straight out of the reed, out of the comb of the tension box, making the yarn that comes out of that tension box, keeping all of those yarns in order, and then using that green painter's tape to tape it flat and keeping that sequence of yarns. So that way I know which yarns are supposed to come next when I go to thread the heddles. Now, my other tension box, the shacked tension box, it has a function where you can create a shed. So you basically would thread all of these, thread your tension box, but it also has heddles. And so that allows you to create a shed with each one of these sections. So you could insert like a little stick, or you could insert some yarn to separate out sheds and create a cross for you for each one of these 1-inch sections. So then when you have that cross, then you know which thread to pull from when you're going to thread your heddles. In this case, my tension box for the Leclerc does not have a shedding device. So I use this technique where I keep the painter's tape and keep all of the yarn separate, like just keep it in sequence so I know what's coming next. The second piece of painter's tape is I cut off the yarn for that section, and then I just kind of twist the end one time, and then with those yarns, sort of the warp ends contained together in the little section, I tape it down to the rest of the beam so that when I'm cranking, that nothing is unwinding, that these yarns are not flopping around everywhere, that whole section, that chunk of yarn is not flopping around. It's tucked in and it's attached to the sectional beam. And so at the end of that, once I've wound all of the yarn that I need onto the back sectional beam, what I do is I actually have to unroll the sectional back beam a little bit. To unroll it enough so that the yarn can come up and over the back bar, and then all the way, like you have to unroll enough so that it comes over the back bar, and then with enough distance to come through the heddles and then to the front of the loom here. So that's actually unrolling quite a bit of yarn. Now, because those sections, those chunks of yarn, those 14 ends, they're still sort of bundled together with green tape, they're obviously not going to come through the heddles at that time. So what I did is I suspended a metal bar, and it was the metal bar that actually comes with that cloth that was on the back. It was like a warp apron cloth. And so after installing the sectional beam, I had to take that bar out. And so taking that bar out, I'm using that bar to basically hold up all of the warp ends in the back. So I put the bar across horizontally here, and then I held it up on either side with some lease sticks. So the lease sticks basically rested on the top of the loom here and on the back of the loom here, and then put the metal bar on top. And then I secured it with some elastic bands so that it wouldn't roll off or fall off or anything like that. And so basically with all of that yarn laid over the back of the loom and then over this metal bar, the metal bar basically allows that yarn to come up closer behind my heddles here. And so then with each section, I would take each section, unwrap the first piece of painter's tape that was holding the twist, and then unwrap the second piece of painter's tape to open up and see how all of the yarns are aligned. And then from there, I would pick each thread and thread it using the pattern that I needed for these heddles. And so I threaded all of the heddles, and now I am just slaying the reed. And I want 14 ends per inch for my set. And the reed that I have is 12 ends per inch. So I didn't consult a reed substitution chart or anything, but I think it pretty much makes sense that if you have 14 ends that have to fit into 1 inch, and my reed fits 12 ends per inch, if I put all 14 ends through, I'll have 2 extra. So like 1 per slot, and then in 2 spots, I'll have to double up. So basically I did 5 ends threaded singly, and then 2 ends threaded doubly, and then 5 ends, and then 2 ends. So that's basically 7 ends and 7 ends. That's how I worked it out. So if all of this sounds like a lot of work, it's actually not that bad. It's actually, it is very smooth, and the whole process goes faster. The more you do it, the faster you get. It's just practice. I actually time myself. I always time myself because I'm always curious about how I'm doing. I'm curious about if I'm able to get faster, if I'm able to get more efficient. I'm always looking for ways to hold the yarn in my left hand or my right hand so that everything is just a little bit more smooth and there's not a whole bunch of extraneous movements and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, I'm just about a few inches from finishing the threading process for the reed, the slaying process. And then once this is done, once I finish slaying the reed, then I'm just going to tie onto the front, weave a little bit of headers, and I will be ready to weave this blanket. So if you are at all curious about why I'm making this baby blanket, beyond the fact that I'm making a baby blanket, it's that it's going to be all part of a class that is going to be about twill gamps and weaving twill on 4 shafts. I think the class is even going to be called Twill Gamp on 4 shafts. But basically we talked about this a couple of months ago, a couple of weeks ago, but this is the twill gamp that I wove. And so a twill gamp demonstrates all of the different kinds of variations that you can get by doing different kinds of threading, different kinds of treadling, and all the patterns that come out of that. And so this baby blanket is sort of an extrapolation of this twill gamp by taking one of the patterns that's in here and expressing that in a larger cloth, like in an all over pattern. And so there's enough warp on here to make 3 blankets. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pick 3 different patterns out of this cloth to make 3 completely different blankets. We'll see what happens. So that is basically it for today. I would love to hear from you if you are interested in learning more about weaving on 4 shafts, weaving twills, weaving another kind of weave structure. I would love to hear about that because I'm always trying to figure out what am I going to weave next. And it's really easy to get distracted and go down all these different rabbit holes of all the things that you can learn about weaving. And so having this sort of structure, a way of, learning things step by step is always what I'm looking for personally. So I'm interested to hear from you about how you're going about learning weaving and what is capturing your interest right now as well. So if you like this episode, please do hit the like button. And if you would like to see more content like this, please do hit subscribe. We come here every Friday or almost every Friday to talk about something to do with color and craft and things that make us happy. Thank you guys so much for being here. I will see you in the next one. All right, bye for now.